Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be here again. I did the talk, similar talk, but with a different slant at the November event in London, which was good. And this is equally good. I hope that I can introduce to you a bit more information and understanding of the IOT and what that's all about. Well, I suppose I ought to elaborate about the tequila thing. Yeah, no, well, I've only ever been drunk once because I tried tequila and it was a very bad mistake and it put me off for life. So I'm brief to talk about a little bit about me, I suppose, to start off with. I'm Vice President of Sales at the moment for a company called Distech Controls. I say for the moment because I haven't been doing it for that long. I was working for another company called Tridium for a long time. And I've been in the building management control space for a long time. So I want to share some of the insights I've gained from that time. Let's start by talking about what do we mean by the Internet of Things. This was a term that actually is quite old. It goes all the way back to 1999. And this is a definition you can find on Wikipedia. So it's basically about connecting devices, all sorts of sensors in all sorts of things, cars, buildings, objects of all sorts, computers and the like, to exchange data and connect those together. It's not just about monitoring, but it's also about control. Because you can use the data that you've got to then interact with those buildings or those cars or those factories or those smart cities to do useful things. And I think what we are all interested in this because it gives us the ability to manage our environments in a smarter way. To do that, we need analytics, and I want to talk about some of these terms in this session now. So we're basically talking about connecting people with networks and devices and a lot of data together. Now this involves 5 subjects that I'd like to touch on today. The first of which is big data, and then analytics, and then cloud services, but also talking on the way about wireless and edge devices. And all of those, I think, are what is commonly understood to do with IoT. Now, we're here at an FM conference, and why is that? It's because there's a convergence going on between all the things that are to do with IT and information technology and what I'm going to call operational technology, which is the facilities management side of things. And that convergence, I think IoT sits very much in the middle of that, at least as far as buildings is concerned. And there's a lot of business value associated with that convergence and with what you can do with the IoT in buildings. To do with improving the efficiency of the building, the way that the fabric and services and equipment within the building are maintained, so you get operational benefits. Also, your ability to comply with the increasing amount of legislation that we all have to deal with in an automatic way, rather than it being very manual to have to do. And also being able to forecast better what the needs of the organization and business are going to be over time, and especially with regard to space, because that is an expensive commodity in our world, office space or production space. And then also delivering new benefits and services to the occupants of the buildings, because people's expectations are going up. We're all experiencing plenty of new services and things through our smartphones and through computing technology. So we expect that now in the workplace as well. So there's a challenge to all of that, though, because the interoperation of what have previously been siloed and separate things is quite an issue for many businesses and organizations. And even the way we run our business is all in different departments. And those departments are increasingly needed to talk to each other and share information to make any of this work. So, well, a couple of things about why now, I think, particularly. I mean, it's not like suddenly happened, but it's a trend. Is because the increase, I mentioned the increasing legislation, but there's that demand is one pressure, but also the availability of software for forecasting and collecting data in businesses has led to increasing ability to compare against one another. We're information rich, and that comparison has led to even more demand for benchmarking, reporting, goal setting. Everything seems to be getting more complex in that direction. And also the energy pressures. Rising energy costs, utility costs, have meant that we need to understand where that energy use is being used within the building much more detailed than was the case before, hence the sub-metering and all that kind of side of things. And then, of course, climate change is also driving a demand for carbon reduction, and there's a whole other agenda with that, which again is forcing organisations and all of you to address all of those different topics. And this is meaning that departments are having to collaborate, talk to each other. It used to be that the facilities information and maintaining the building, as I'm sure you're aware, was very much sort of, oh, it's a maintenance activity, we've got to keep it running. But now everyone else is interested in what the building's doing because it impacts on the productivity, as we've been hearing. People are becoming much more aware of that. It impacts on the bottom line in terms of energy costs. It's affecting the occupants, your ability to retain and attract staff if the environment's not right. So there's a whole load of ways in which this is causing more interaction. And the IoT and the openness, and I think that's one of the things about the IoT is, I'm hoping, is we're going to see is that it opens up the information to be shared in a better way. So we're dealing with a tsunami of data. That's the way I've characterized it, an ocean of information. And the real-time information in particular that's coming from our buildings. If you've got a BMS or connected systems, a sub-metering system, you will have lots of information, or data at least, coming to you. And then there's the issue, what are you doing with it? How are you using that information? And there are lots of other sources of data that you want to combine it with. So do you want to, or you need to be linking it with the human resources data and the production data and the environmental data for the area and the traffic flow data. And there's lots of different sources of data that are not to do with what's in your building that can also be useful in the way you manage things. So finding what you want is a problem. With all of this data, this tsunami of data, it's becoming almost impossible to process it at a human level. And so we need analytics. Now, what do I mean by analytics? Now, first, I'm going to be showing you some visualizations in a minute, but that's not what I mean by analytics, but that is what a lot of people have talked about. They think of dashboards and visual ways of describing the data as being analytics. Well, sort of, because it does help you pick out information. But because there's so much going on, analytics is really more about computer algorithms automatically processing the data and spitting out answers for you that really get to the nub of what you need to know. So I think analytics is a word I'd like to put a better definition on, which is that it's not just anything about visualizing data, it's actually about computer processing it in a smart way with complex rules or machine learning based algorithms to get you to an answer. Now the thing about computers, there's lots of things not to like about computers perhaps, but there are lots of, the one thing about them is they work 24/7. They don't get tired, they don't fall asleep, they are reliable, well, when they're working, and in terms of the way they process the data, unlike human beings who can make a lot of mistakes. So analytics gives us the ability, orders of magnitude greater, to process all this data that's coming our way. So it helps us find the needle in the haystack. And it is very good at identifying patterns and trends in data that would almost be impossible to spot as a human being, and exceptions that can be highlighted. It also overcomes a big problem that we have in our industry and in many industries of skill shortages. You need intelligence to do this stuff. And there are intelligent people, but there's not enough of them. So if you can get them to distill their knowledge and understanding experience into the analytics process and then run that 24/7 on all your buildings, then you've multiplied the effectiveness of that skill. And the output of analytics is actionable insights, something you can do something about. Now, it can get even better than that, because software can actually directly and automatically then intervene in the building back and do something about the problem that's been identified. But other times it's just providing an alert to you in some form that lets you go, right, we need to do something about that. There's a problem, we've identified it. So what data are we talking about? Well, on the right-hand side of this page, there's a long list of things in buildings, and that's not exhaustive, I'm sure. There's many other things that I could put down on the list, but you know them as well as I do. It depends on the type of building. You know, not everyone's got lots of refrigerations, but certainly supermarkets and cold stores would have, and a cheese processing plant, I was talking to someone earlier, would have a lot of refrigeration. Other people will have a lot of visitors in their building, so they'll have visitor management systems, but not everyone has one of those. You know, but there are lots of different systems in our buildings. Originally, or historically should I say, all the different systems that were doing any control or management were all standalone and pretty dumb. And then they got increasingly networked together. So many of your systems, I expect, are now networked to varying degrees, and they form what we call systems. And classically, the heating and ventilation control is called the building management system. It's a bit of a misnomer, because a building management system should manage the whole building, but most BMSs do not manage the whole building. They just manage the air conditioning and the heating controls. But they could manage much more. And the systems, the company I work for, Distech, we manage the lighting, we manage the blinds, and we get involved in a lot more than just the heating and air conditioning. But even now, the reality is that we're talking about lots of islands of intelligence within the building. There are not many of the buildings, if you took it statistically, that got it all joined up. There are buildings that have done a really great job and have got everything worked out, but I'm afraid they're in the minority right now. Just to bring it down to, I'm talking about commercial buildings and what we're concerned about business, but the same thing is happening in your homes. Most people's homes, if you've got controls, there are still several million homes without any controls at all, amazingly, in this day and age. But anyway, most of us have got central heating, most of us have got a thermostat, and probably a time clock controlling the heating. But it's standalone. It's pretty dumb, doesn't talk to anything, it just does its thing, and it's a bit fiddly to program. And it probably doesn't get adapted very much, and when you go for the weekend, you can't be bothered to turn it off. But now, in the last few years, we've seen something of a revolution of smart thermostats, and you've all seen the advertising, I expect, and everyone's heard of Nest. But there are others. Tado, I would recommend. Hive is very good, and Honeywell Evo Home as well have provided solutions, and there are lots of others as well, I could mention. But Nest is the one that put the big bucks on publicity and advertising because it's part of Google. What they've done is they said, no, we're going to connect this data to the cloud and we're going to give you a smartphone app. And fundamentally, smartphones have just brought heating controls into the 21st century and the internet age and given you a solution. But that's really only one step. And it's on the way, because I think what we're going to end up with in our homes as well is something that all of the systems interact. I bought a new house recently, last year, and it has internet-connected ovens. And I think, okay, I didn't intend that, I didn't need that. But actually, knowing when the oven's finished and getting a little alert on your phone is quite useful, I discover. But it will become the norm. Whether we particularly want it or even need it, it's happening. Appliances are getting the internet connectivity built in for free, almost. It doesn't cost much more to do it, so why not? And there are other benefits, because it lets the manufacturer perhaps know when the thing is broken and can diagnose what's wrong with it. There's all sorts of advantages which we have only begun to explore in the industry. But all of that is happening in our homes, and it's happening in commercial buildings that we manage for our professional lives. So where is all this data going is the next thing to talk about. And the answer is it's going to the cloud. Now, the cloud is actually massive warehouses with hundreds of thousands of computers in them that consume an awful lot of energy, located at strategic places all over the world. A disproportionate number of them in the UK, and also an increasing number in Northern Europe because it's cold and data centers like cold because they don't want to get overheated. But the data has to be held somewhere, and it's held in these massive data centers. And these are these are run and managed by big companies, and there's far more names than I could mention, but some of the big guys, Microsoft, Amazon, IBM. And that cloud hosting is our future. Having enterprise servers and enterprise data centers is, maybe some of you are managing those things, but they're being closed down at quite a rapid rate as stuff migrates to the cloud. That's not to say that all data centers will close down, but certainly statistically, again, the trend is all the data is going to the cloud. And also increasingly, we are seeing software as a service coming along, because instead of people buying a hugely expensive license and then having to maintain it on site in the enterprise, you're just paying for a service as you need it, as you use it on a regular basis. And that works for people's operational budgets very well. And it works in FM too. Again, there are far too many names to mention, so I'm just being a bit biased and mentioning the ones that my group is involved with, Atrius and Building OS. And I just want to show you some screens from the Building OS, which is a US company. They're actually in Europe very much. Well, they do some business in the UK, but they're mainly the US at the moment, called Lucid. And they are cloud hosting a set of dashboards and information for FM applications, for energy management, with mapping, with all sorts of different kinds of displays showing which parts of the building are using the most energy. They're using color coding very effectively to say, oh, the Apple Commons area is using far more than it should be. That's an exception. On the other hand, the green ones, the day halls, being very efficient today. And at a glance, you can see things in color. This one's a very good one, and this is used by a lot of companies, which is that having what's called a heat map, but in this case, it's actually monitoring energy consumption. And again, at a glance, you can see in the period when the building or the zone was using the most energy. And that's a good tool. But again, I would say it's not analytics particularly, although it's giving you a helpful analysis. Now that's and then you've got submetering, which takes it down and you break up the energy usage into different areas. And then also you can benchmark your facility against other facilities, and you can look at energy charging infrastructures. You can look at the renewables in the building. You can look at individual items of equipment. I mean, chillers use an awful lot of energy. They're probably in most buildings the biggest energy consumer. It's the way you want to put some concentration of effort to get the efficiency right. This is showing you a number of pieces of information all on one screen about how many problems did you have regarding works orders to do with these chillers, what the asset information about the chiller is, and then what its energy consumption has been as well. So this is all very useful visualization. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the history of things, because we're on a journey. It's always an evolution. The building management system world that I inhabit is really only started around the 80s, we could say, as computer technology sort of filtered into managing the way buildings were controlled. And initially it was all about just controlling comfort conditions, and the amount of data was very small. That's shown by that little pie on the right hand side there. And it was good for ratings. It was letting you understand general issues in the building, but it wasn't good for energy management. It wasn't designed that way. But I think from about 2000, because of energy crises and increasing energy costs, the buildings have become smarter in a way, and there's more attempt to analyze energy usage with submetering and so on, and that's led to much more data. But the future is more about cognitive buildings, where I think buildings are really going to become properly smart and properly intelligent, and we will need AI to manage them effectively. So I don't know if anyone else has talked about this yet, but certainly IBM are pushing this very hard with their Watson artificial intelligence, that the complexity of the data that we have to deal with from the building, there's so many different variables, so many different factors, that it's really going to be too much for us, and we will need an AI to help us with all of that, because the amount of data has just gone up several orders of magnitude. But that's the future, and who knows how it will pan out. So where we're at the moment is that to achieve any kind of convergence of all the different data, you need various protocols or languages. Protocol is just the technical word we use in building management for the computer language we use to talk between devices. It used to be, and a lot of the systems that you'll be dealing with are probably still very proprietary. I mean, Trend is the market leader in the UK, and they've had proprietary protocol for a very long time. They have belatedly gone somewhat open, having BACnet support, but the world in BMS has moved very strongly towards open protocols. There are many of these, however. It's not a singular answer. The strongest, if you like, in the HVAC control is BACnet. That's adopted globally pretty much now. On the electrical side, it's Modbus, but there are other buses, like M-Bus is used for metering particularly. KNX is very popular for some lighting control, and particularly in the Germanic markets in Europe, but not at all in the US, I don't think. I might be wrong. Lonworks was very popular, but is less so now. Enocean is a wireless protocol. DALI is a lighting protocol. SNNP is an IOT protocol. And all of these are needed if you're going to converge the data from different systems. And there are many more of them. This is not an exhaustive list. And neither is it enough, because actually things have got a whole lot more complicated with the IoT, because now there's a lot more wireless devices, because we're retrofitting existing buildings with different devices, and they use a whole raft of other protocols, LoRa, Z-Wave, Zigbee, other wireless protocols. Also, there are more encrypted protocols like MQTT, DSA, and others that are coming up, and OPC UA that are coming up and being used that weren't there before. So it's a very complex landscape and far too technical. I'm just giving you a flavor. And then there's a whole load of new databases. We're all used to SQL. That's what we've been using for a very long time. But with all this data, actually SQL can't hack it. So you need, for real-time data, SQL is not ideal at all. So you need a different kind of database, and there's a whole raft of those and a whole lot of services that go with that. And of course, we're not just talking about buildings. So just to complete it, to say, of course, the buildings now need to link up with the public spaces around them. They need to link up with the transportation. They need to link up with the energy sources and the renewables generation, because we now have a demand response situation where we can interact between generation and demand to balance the two. And it's a very complex landscape. So we talked earlier in the day, or at the beginning, and I sat in one of the talks which was about the air quality, and that was a great talk by Stephen, I think it was, from Managed Assets. He was talking about the air quality issues in buildings and the importance of productivity and cognitive ability related to that. This is from JLL, who publicised this. I don't think they originated the research, but it's quite commonly discussed, and other speakers might have mentioned it, that there is if you look at the cost of a building, and this is from America, so it's in square foot, sorry, it's not metric, the energy use in dollars associated per square foot is about $3, but the rent costs you about $30 for your square foot. And then the employee comes in at about $300 per square foot. So you've got a factor of 10 type relationship between these different elements of the cost of buildings or running your organization, should I say. And this, of course, is where the value is. So one of the reasons building management systems have not been often, some people, there's people joke that 20% of them are turned off, that people don't think they're important, is they've only been looking at the energy. It hasn't really figured on main board attention a lot of the time. But when you start talking about productivity arguments, as the talk earlier was about air quality and the issues around measuring that and keeping that good and having adequate ventilation, then that's a whole different proposition. So employee well-being has got to be top of the agenda, because it drives both your ability to attract and retain staff, especially in places like London, where resources are scarce, then skilled resources are scarce, then that's a big issue. And that's the productivity then. Once you've got those people, are they giving you the maximum for the organisation? And of course that's interesting because it's profit, and that's ultimately about whether the business thrives or dies. So I think the International Wellbeing Institute that was referred to earlier in that talk, and I'm referring to it again, is really important development, and I'm very pleased to see that it's happening and there is more focus on this. It matters a lot. Just to give you some examples, Distech is very strong in the Paris market for commercial office space, and we probably got something in the order of 50% market share. I'm not quite sure, but it's in that order. The people who are putting our systems in are liking them because we are open to the IOT type of things, and everything is on IP now. All our controls are on IP, and the reason that's interesting is because they want, for their tenants of the building trying to rent it out, or if they're an owner-occupier, they are wanting for all their employees an app. So this is back to the consumer services side, and that app has got to do quite a lot of things. They want one thing for the building that lets them interact with the building and control their local temperature, light and blinds, but that's just the beginning, because they also want to be able to do wayfinding. They want to be able to do hot desk management. They want it to be able to look at the catering, having a menu for the day, or even having a camera or looking at the queue to see what the wait time is, or make an offer on the app to say, well, look, if you go in off-peak time, we'll give you 10% off, to encourage people to spread their lunchtime or whatever. That's going to be tough in France, and my company's based in France, and their lunch is sacrosanct. Has to be a proper lunch, not like the UK at all. So well-being, fitness, and maybe there's a gym downstairs, the booking for that, availability, personal development, social responsibility, so they can interact with the app to know what the energy consumption is, their collective or their personal, if they're tracking what their usage is. There's a whole load of different elements that you can think, and this is not, I'm sure, exhaustive. Because it's at the beginning of a new world. If you think about when the iPhone was launched, which is not that long ago, there was no app store. It just answered calls, let you browse the internet a bit, and do your emails and so on. Now look at what it can do. Now we're in the same place with buildings and the new world of buildings all being joined up and connected. There are so many possibilities, and we don't even know them all yet. They will emerge. But this is happening now. These are real projects and real examples of apps that are happening right now. So this is happening in London too. I don't know about elsewhere, but I've been involved in a few projects in London. But I think Paris seems to be a particularly progressive market in Europe for this. What that's taught us is that no one can do it all anymore. We're certainly as a company not going to be developing all these apps. There are specialist companies that do that. There are so many different dimensions to this. We haven't talked about cybersecurity, but of course with all this data sloshing around, there's huge issues around cybersecurity that's been in the news all the time recently. The integration is a whole technical complexity in itself, as I've touched on. Then you've got the whole mobile side of the data and where that goes with wearables and watches and whatever. And then there's all these apps and the analytics and the dashboards that we've shown. So there's a huge spread, and no one can do it anymore. So that also means for you finding where you go for the right skills, or gaining the right skills to ensure that you can keep up with this in FM with all these developments and this very rapid pace of change. So in conclusion, this is about more data and communications than ever before. Everything's going to get connected. The open standards are desperately needed, and in most sectors they're sort of happening, but there are ways of pulling it all together, and there are technologies that let you do that. All that data is being processed and going increasingly to the cloud and being used software as a service. And what we're about is moving from a reactive environment where the building is reacting to the people in it to one that works in harmony with and is predictive and anticipating and optimizing that building for its occupants and for the business efficiency and productivity. And then we're also, in doing that, I haven't talked much about it, edge computing. One of the things that's happening is that more computers are getting cheaper and smaller. So, of course, more of the processing can be done locally. And not everything goes to the cloud. You can actually do some processing locally in the end devices, edge devices. So what we're trying to do, as our part of it, is to provide a really state-of-the-art building management system which is open to the IoT, can link up with it, and provide a really good user experience. So that involves having something that can cope with more than just the heating and ventilation systems, but other aspects of the building. We're using a technology called the Niagara Framework, which is the global leading software for integrating all the different protocols. And also we provide everything now on IP level, because that's what the future is for networking. Instead of what were previously called serial networks, which are twisted pair cable. Now everything's on Cat5 or Cat6 or 7 or whatever it is now. And we're trying to address very much the needs of those who are installing the systems. We work with integrators who are the ones with the skills to deliver these systems into buildings, to make sure that they are provided with the best experience and efficient, but also respecting the building owners and their needs and requirements. And obviously, of course, you in facilities management, that we're providing systems that work for the life cycle of the building and give you something you can engage with. And of course, at the end of the day, it's all about the occupant and what experience they have of the building we're helping control. So I'd just like to finish with a brief video, and just to, before I run it, to highlight that this is a video shot in our office, which is talking about this value in buildings of IoT. We use people counting cameras, and as well as PIR sensors, which have been used for years, but people counting cameras over in certain areas in the building to actually know exactly how many people are in meeting rooms or in particular floors, areas. We also integrated it with the meeting room booking system, and also the hue control, the color control for the circadian rhythm lighting management. But there's lots of other features, and a lot of that is enabled by what's called a REST API. Some of you are familiar with the term and others perhaps not, but that's the standard way of making web services interact to get a mobile app to talk to some computing or IoT device. And all of our controls have that built in. But other people are doing that too, so I'm just saying that that's the way things are going. It's not any longer about those BMS-specific protocols, it's much more about the IoT or IT protocols. So let's run that. It's only a couple of minutes, by the way. Okay, so thank you very much for listening. Do you have any questions about all that? Because it's covered quite a lot of different aspects.
You mentioned some people doing it really well already.
Mm-hmm.
Say who they are.
That would be probably a little unfair. Well, not unfair is the wrong word. I've encountered various projects that I know of, but I don't have detailed knowledge about all of. I know lots of snippets rather than having a full picture of any one project. But I'm aware that some people are being progressive in their approach to it. But I also know that I hear, from people who are saying of their own buildings, I'm 20 years out of date. It's a long way behind. So that's why I'm saying it's not there yet. But it's not even consistent. Even within one organisation, you might have some of the sites that they've really got it nailed, and others that they haven't caught up yet, or they haven't bothered to invest to bring on the thing. So I don't want to be unfair to anyone. Or sorry if I'm not answered that very well, but.
Any other questions?
Oh well, yes, I'm sure there might be some others. Yeah.
Over there.
How far do you think AI and IoT will go in terms of replacing people in FA?
I don't. Well, I think that's a complicated. There's another technology there called robotics, isn't there? I mean, I think physically, a lot of FM functions require physical activity, and then you're talking about robotics. Obviously, AI is necessary in order to have the robotics, but you've got the mechanical issues there. If we're just talking about AI as data processing, I think the problem we have in FM is there's not enough people to do the data processing at the moment. So we're not replacing anyone. I think we're augmenting what we are able to do, because the reality, most people tell me anyway, when I have the conversation, that they've got data coming in and they don't know, not that they don't even know what they want to do with it. Some people do, but they haven't had the resources and the budget to actually properly process that data. And so I think that AI gives us the opportunity to do a much better job with that. But I don't think of it as replacement, really. No, not. Maybe I'm wrong there, but not yet.
Chris, one of the things that we talked about today is the skills gap in FM.
Yes.
Particularly across our industry. Do you think that the proliferation of technology, such as you explained pretty well there, do you think that's exacerbating that?
Yeah, it's not helping. Well, I mean, I think the government has a really important role to do a much better job about encouraging technical careers and encouraging young people to go and incentivize. Because I was talking to someone over drinks before. Oh yeah, there was one of the people attending this event who was saying that they can't get any more engineers. They're having to go out and set up offices in other countries because they cannot get them in London, because there's that much competition for the scarce resource. They were talking about computer programmers. But I mean, technical resources are at a premium, and I think that's only going to get worse. Yeah, because this is not easy yet. I mean, I'm on a mission in my industry to make things simpler, because I just think it's the way, life's far too complicated. So let's make it simpler. But from a point of view of achieving simplicity, it actually requires a lot more work and skills to actually get to that simplicity. So we're trying to make our system easier to engineer, but actually we need more development and investment to actually get there to do that. And I think that'll be true with these intelligent buildings as well. It'll take more effort to get the intelligent building. When you get it, and perhaps if you can even productize that process, you've done it on one building, well, it'll be a lot easier on the second building and the third building, because you know where you're going and what you're doing. And you've got the template, if you like. But that process will require a lot more thinking and planning and effort than we have at the moment, yeah. And it's a real problem. It's a very big problem. Maybe the industry, I don't know how much the FM industry is doing. I mean, I know in our controls industry, we have the trade association, the BCIA, has established courses, because nobody else was, to do training on basic, how do you control HVAC equipment properly? Because there's a dearth of people who know how to do that really well. So, I mean, in the FM, I think you need, if you already have courses, as I suspect you do, there need to be ones that are about talking about this smart technology and this connected world, and how do you even manage the process of procuring it? Because, you've got quite a challenge in specifying it. and not having the wool pulled over your eyes by the guys who want to sell you something very expensive but not delivering.
Okay, any more questions for Chris? So please join me in saying thank you to Chris. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you.